Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm very glad that we have this opportunity to come together for me to share with you this research around privacy, trust, and digital identities in the immersive experience of the future. Now, when people read this title, they think immediately about Snow Crash and the metaverse. And that book that was published in 1992 really predicting this parallel virtual world where people would live. But actually, if you think about one of the very first places where an audience started to experience immersive, emotional experiences, for me, that is not the metaverse, that is cinema. And there is one specific movie director that revolutionized the way movies were made, really to increase that emotional participation of the audience into the movie. And that person is my fellow Italian, Sergio Leone. He is the father of spaghetti western movies, and in the 60s, he decided to do things a little bit differently. That style is still recognized today, so he would go for some lengthy, long shots, and those long shots would draw the audience into the scene. And then he would alternate that with some extreme close-ups on the face of the actors. And that was because he wanted the audience really to connect with that actor, to feel what that actor was feeling, what that character was feeling in that specific moment. Really to increase the ability to have this connection, this emotional connection with the movie. And in fact, if you think about how we define the metaverse today, it's still that very much that idea of the multidimensional and multisensory experience that we want. This is a definition from Forrester, and we think about the metaverse as this extension, a 3D extension of the internet, really to deliver these more engaging, more immersive, more emotional experiences to our audiences. Before I go there, let me just make a little pause here, because I know that recently in the news, we have seen things about the metaverse. We have seen the firing. We are still the crypto financial system almost collapsing. And we have also seen, still we start to see the slow adoption of the metaverse from a customer perspective. Now, these kind of things, well, first of all, look, we have seen them coming. And I can show you this research, various pieces that we have published last year, that we were saying, look, there is a lot of push here, there is a lot of promises being made, but it's not that simple. The metaverse is going to change the way we engage as a society, we engage customers, we engage each other fundamentally. And there are things that need to work, and we need to work on them properly. So all what was in the news is not to say that this is not happening or there is changing dramatically, but it's a very good reality check. This is something big that we are trying to build. This is something that is going to change completely the way we interact with one another. And so we need also to understand the complexity. And so a lot of what was in the news is just a reminder. We need a good dose of realism here, and we need to be realistic. But don't get me wrong, this is still a big, big opportunity. This is a forecast from Bloomberg. The metaverse is an opportunity worth $800 billion. We are talking big numbers here. And if you're thinking that, maybe it's a couple of kids playing games, well, there is much more to it. And here's some example. Ralph Lauren is one of the first brands to say that they increase profit because of their presence in the metaverse. And we know from our data that consumers that engage in these hybrid experiences when they need to buy something, that hybrid experience is going to influence their willingness to buy. And Ralph Lauren is saying it happens to us. They like to try on stuff virtually, they like to look around for what we offer virtually, and they buy more from us. And then China. China is an important market here because we see the adoption, consumer adoption of metaverse-like experiences being very much embraced. And Zelly, which is their avatar-based apps, has been one of the most downloaded last year. So we watch the market to really see how these consumers and customers' behavior around these technologies are changing. And then governments. That's the other big piece of the picture. And I have the example of Dubai that now is linking a metaverse part of the strategy to their broader digital transformation strategy. And they are saying that in the next 5 years, they will create 40,000 jobs and an opportunity that is worth $4 billion. This is government. But before I go on, and I have a lot of things to show you about the metaverse and the risks of the metaverse, I want you to think about this specific statement here. While we understand the opportunity, and while people are talking a lot about these opportunities, and by all means, this is an opportunity that we need to take, there is also a lot of risk. And I think that the element of risks is not something that organizations are thinking about today. And I tell you that because I'm sure that as you approach your own customers, you might find out that some of their executives, some other business units, are already investing in the metaverse, creating and buying digital properties to exist in that space. It's not different than what companies have done with websites and applications when the internet started. It's exactly that same relationship, building digital properties in the metaverse so that they can invite consumers and customers to experience their brands, to transact with their brands, to spend time with their brands. And so it's very important at this stage that we start having those conversations about what it means to build a digital presence in the metaverse, what it means to invite customers to join brands in this space. But also, again, in the spirit of reality checks, we're not there yet. What we have today is not the metaverse yet. We like to say that we are there, the precursors. To get to the metaverse, really, we need to solve what they call the meta-transversal issue. The meta-transversal issue is the ability to cross-link platforms. So that if I go to the metaverse, I can walk and move from one environment to the next in a way that is easy enough, in a way that is just natural for me to do, as if I was in the real world. And while everybody's focusing on the technology side of things, so this ability to cross-link platforms, I really want you to pay attention to this last stage. This is the real metaverse. And of course, there is the cross-linking on the platforms, but look, there is a system of governance, standards, rules that need to exist for my digital identity to be able to be usable, portable in that metaverse. What it means is that as a user, I need to have a digital identity that it can move from one environment to the next. And this is really what the challenge of the metaverse, the opportunity of the metaverse is. It's not just the technology aspect, it's also this idea of creating robust, secure, trusted digital identities that we can carry with us as we move from one environment to the next. And of course, there are also big questions about the legal personality of the avatar, or the ability to actually make a person liable for something that the avatar has done in the metaverse. All of that really relies on those robust, trusted identity. So the digital identity piece is fundamental block to really get to what the metaverse is. And this is why something that we are talking about here today, this is where customers need help with. And I also want to give you a little bit of an example of how it is, this evolution. How does it feel from a consumer perspective to actually move from where we are today to the next 10 years? And this is the way we think about it at Forrester. So today, you can use your phone, your laptop, to go in one of these virtual shop or virtual environment and buy something for your avatar. In the next 2 to 3 years, probably we will be wearing more of those headsets, assuming their price will be lower, and also the usability will be a little better. And we will be able to meet people in these digital worlds and possibly start to buy things in the metaverse that also will appear in one single transaction in our front door. So really starting to see the ability to buy something virtually and then have that in your real life. In the next 5 years, well, we'll have avatars that will be much more personalized. They will use our voice, our gesture in real life to really act in the metaverse. And we possibly will have the ability for an avatar in the digital world to send a text to a friend in the real world and invite that friend to join you in one of the virtual spaces. We are also going to see how the digital wallets and digital transaction will fully happen in this digital world. And then finally, in the next 10 years is where the hybrid and the physical experiences will merge. And maybe we'll show up in front of the door of one of these digital boutiques, and they immediately, the shopping assistant will know exactly what we are looking for, what we want, and we'll choose something in the metaverse, we'll pay for that item in the metaverse, and it will be delivered to our avatar, but also to us in just one single transaction happening in these virtual spaces. So this is why linking the digital identities to a physical, real person, making sure that there is a trusted identity and a secure transactions are the building blocks of the metaverse. How does it look today? Well, I said that there is a lot in terms of risks that we have to look at together with the opportunity. And I always think about this movie, again, it's Sergio Leone, is Il buono, il brutto e il cattivo, which by a translation mistake has become the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this is very much a good way of thinking about the metaverse today, I think. So I'm going to start with the good. In the movie is Clint Eastwood, Blondie, this taciturn, confident bounty hunter. And there is a lot of good in the metaverse today. We talk about some of the opportunity, but here is some more. The entertainment space and the fashion space definitely going hard on the metaverse. There is a lot of fashion weeks and all kinds of fashion shows that are happening, engaging consumers. But also the education. Education is one of those spaces where we see a lot of movement already, when we see a lot of opportunity. This is the University of Maryland Global Campus that is having this pilot. So imagine you are sitting in Maryland in your university, and maybe you are studying, I don't know, Michelangelo sculptures. And you can virtually travel to Florence and go and see the real sculpture as it is there, or you may be traveling to Le Louvre to see one of those masterpieces that you are studying at school. And then healthcare, another space where already there is a lot of investments, really thinking about how the metaverse is going to change dramatically the way we diagnose illnesses and the ways we treat those illnesses. And I wanted to dip a little bit more into the opportunity. This is one of the best, for now, one of the best examples that we also have is Nike. They brought this Nike Land on Roblox, inviting consumers to experience the brand and to transact. They also are strong on the NFTs piece, attaching that NFTs to their goods, to the things that people are going to buy there. And I was impressed by the quote that I put there. They managed to sell 600 pairs of NFT sneakers in 6 minutes when they launched that in their virtual space. But where I think the opportunity is for them is actually to understand that consumers are influenced by the experience that they get with a brand more than price today in many categories, in many ways. And so they want to build this immersive digital experience so that consumers can really engage with the brand, can recognize the brand, and be really desiring to be part of the brand too. So the digital piece is not just a way in which I sell a good to you, it's a way for a consumer to experience the brand and to love that brand. And of course, that is going to be reflected in the metaverse as much as in the real life. And then financial services. These are all examples of banks that have already put money in creating their digital presence in the metaverse. They are inviting customers to meet the staff and have conversation with the bank staff in the metaverse. These are companies that are inviting consumers to make transactions, to invest through all managed in that metaverse. So this is not just a group of children playing in a basement with some video games. This is real business for B2B, for B2C, across verticals. And this is already happening. But I told you that I'm here also to tell you about the bad, the risks. And this is Angel's Eye. He is a cruel mercenary in the movie. And there is a lot of bad in the metaverse today, and something that people are not really thinking about. I have just some example. We read story of harassment in the metaverse, and we have also this idea of terrible, the ability to influence how people think and how people act. We know from research that that as humans, we trust people that look like us. And so what happens is that you have an avatar in front of you that is trying to talk to you about politics or social issues or whatever that is. And because of artificial intelligence, that avatar that now is looking at your face is trying to replicate in their own face pieces of you. And that will increase your willingness to trust that avatar and so to be influenced about what that avatar is telling you. So it is a very subtle but dangerous psychological and emotional manipulation. And when we talk about identity, plenty of danger there. I just have these photos to show you the evil twins and the digital elves. Evil twins, someone that you think you know, an avatar that is talking with the voice of someone that you know, that is looking very much as someone that you know. But in reality, you don't know who is that person, who is that avatar. If we don't have a robust identity layer, we don't know if that avatar is really who we think that person is or that image is. And we can be influenced, we can be tricked in providing credential, financial data, personal data to avatars that we don't know anything about in reality. And the idea of the digital elf is pretty much the same. It's just the extension of this digital assistant. And again, if we don't have certainty about who is behind them, we can be very easily brought to share information, provide details, provide access to very sensitive things of ours. And so without really understanding who these identities are, it's going to be very difficult for us to interact safely in this world. And then the ugly. This is Taco in the movie. He's a Mexican mercenary. Actually, Sergio Leone said that this was his favorite character, and they shared a very weird sense of humor. And they said their own set, even they had a lot of fun together. But there is nothing fun when it comes to really the ugly. And I cover privacy and digital identities, and this was shocking to me. First of all, I really struggled to find data that suggests how the privacy risk is going to change. And I came across this piece from Cornell University. A few researchers decided to select 30 students randomly, give them a normal piece of hardware, was a headset. They used the Oculus One and the Stream VR headsets. They didn't alter those headsets. They just bought them exactly as they are provided in the market. And they invited these 30 students just to solve an escape room, 10 to 20 minutes game, nothing really special, something that many of the students have done anyway in their free time. In about 20 minutes of the game, without the user realizing absolutely nothing, they were able to observe, so the researchers were able to observe about 25 discrete pieces of personal information from each of these students. And you can see there are things like how tall they were, the length of their arms. There were information about the location where they were. From that primary data that they observed, they could derive deterministically another set of data. And you can go there, you can see there is the room area, is the wingspan, and other characteristics of the devices they were using. And then they inferred a third category of data, which started to feel very uncomfortable. There is gender, there is wealth, there is ethnicity, there is disability. And I went deeper into this. I wanted to know exactly what they discovered, really. And here's some example. These researchers, we are talking about 10 to 20 minutes escape room game. We are not talking about anything that sophisticated, really. They could observe 100% accuracy on color blindness. They could tell if any of those students had issue with colors. With 100% accuracy, they could make a judgment around the disability status of the students. And then, something that really caught my attention. These researchers were able to run a full Monte Carlo cognitive assessment. That is an assessment that is typically carried out by doctors and nurses that is going to allow them to diagnose things like dementia, attention disorder, post-traumatic disorder, and things like that. So and of course the user doesn't know. The user doesn't have an idea that there is so much scrutiny on them as they are playing. Now, if you were to ask me if I had a child, a teenager, with some depression, I really wanted Meta not to know about that at all. But these realities are such that actually companies like Meta will be able to understand those kind of issues before parents, before families even do. They can share that with marketers. They can share that with governments if they want. And you as a user don't have control over these kind of things. This was very upsetting to me. And so I decided, as I say, to embrace evil. So I bought a VR device for myself. And I really wanted to go through the settings and see if from a privacy perspective, from a data sharing perspective, I could control some of that data flow. I'm not kidding. This is true. I took 400 screenshots of privacy policies starting from the App Store, the manufacturer policy, and the device privacy policy. 400 screenshots. Huge cognitive load. Honestly, already going through that was tough. Then I found that there are some pages that are privacy by default. The reality is that if you look at the small print, even in those pages, they are saying, oh yes, this is privacy protective, but there is all this data that anyway we are taking from you. And then I finally found the additional data, stuff that as a user you can decide whether you want to share or not. I found that in the policy. If you want to change that, so to really be more granular in what you share, you had to go to the browser, to the device, then to the browser, then to the setting, then to the privacy settings, then to go and find the specific page, the specific control that you had to change. In substance, you give up. It's so difficult. The experience by design is so bad that you're thinking, over here, I have this shiny object. I have the metaverse. And over here, I have privacy and data around my identity. And it feels so difficult, so old-fashioned as an experience, so bad that I give up. Privacy, who cares? It's too difficult to do. And today, this is by design. The experience coming into the middle, making life of users very, very difficult. But this is important to consider. Your customers will be inviting their own customers, their own end users, to join them into these digital worlds. It will be their responsibility to make sure that their data, personal data, identity data, financial data, is taken care of securely. That is the challenge. And so one way of really thinking about this for me was, let's think about the evolution of the metaverse, but how things are going to change. How in the next 10 years, this whole thing will evolve, and how we prepare to manage risks appropriately. And so this is research that I am about to publish, and there will be more details, but I took exactly the same framework today, in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years, and in 10 years. And I looked at some specific variable, how the experience itself is going to change once actually we come to really embrace headsets rather than our phones, for example. How the governments will react. I see a lot of requests for the metaverse regulation, metaverse standards, when these are going to appear. And then the ecosystem, how the companies, big and small, that are building the metaverse today, how are they agreeing between themselves about data sharing, data collection? And then finally, consumers and users. How are they engage with this technology? What are they expecting to be there in terms of protection? And so for now, I said we are just the beginning. We are still relying on the classic devices for these pieces of digital experiences. And so as you talk to your customers, today is the time to really strengthen the technology and the processes for trusted digital identity and digital transactions. I talk to customers on a daily basis, And every single time we think about risk-based decisions, think about the risk connected to a process and think about how the identity has to be verified, how the authentication has to work for that risk to be mitigated within the specific process, they struggle. And thinking about the risks of this new era of the metaverse will be extremely important. And so building that muscle around risk, processes, and technology is a fundamental step. And it's something they need to do today. In the next 2 years, we are going to see 3D experiences that will start to blend with internet experiences more, and we are going to see more of those self-sovereign, decentralized identities. This is where I don't need to share everything about my identity. If I want to have access to something specifically, I can only share my age. I can only share my nationality, depending on the use case. And this will give a profound competitive advantage to companies that today start to think about which use cases are the more mature, are the most mature for this decentralized identity space, and which technology is going to allow me to have a degree of trust, maybe different level of trust for the attributes that I will need to enable for these use cases to really work, to really function properly. In the next 5 years, these digital experiences will become more immersive, will be across platform, and really the management of trust of known and unknown identities will be crucial, and this is very important. So this is where we are going to need the interoperable identities. We are going to need very powerful authentication technologies underpinning these experiences. And this is why, and there is a lot of discussion around the anonymity on the metaverse, but this is not about anonymity. You can be still unknown from an experience perspective, but I need to know somewhere the identity has been verified. I need to know that even you are using another name, that even you are showing up with an avatar that is completely synthetic, completely artificial. I need to know that somewhere that identity has been verified. And I need to be able to trust that that process is a trustworthy process. So this is where the system of governance and the technology will have to come together to enable this portability of the identities. And now, in the next 10 years, really is the blend happening. This is physical and digital happening. This is where we really, the kind of harmonized system of rules between digital and physical will need to happen. And this, for me, is what I really am excited about, because this is where digital identity and privacy will finally come together. As I walk into a digital space, my own digital identity will have to moderate for me permission around access controls, permission around data sharing, permission around context. And so the identity is not anymore just the idea of who I am, will be carrying meaning around privacy, around ethics. It will become really the crucial element that can only save us from a future of dystopia, as many are saying. So the role here of identity, because even more important than the technology and the governance, there is an important value element that we need to attach to it. And whenever I give this speech and I get to this point where I said, well, we really need privacy and digital identity to work to this level of perfection if we want the metaverse to work, there are always skeptics. There are always people that tell me, you are a fool, it will never happen. But I tell you one thing, if the metaverse has an opportunity, one only opportunity, to actually become a reality, it's not just an issue of the cross-linking of the platform. It's really an issue for governance to be there, for governance to work. And if we keep thinking about privacy and the trust, identities, just as an afterthought, if we think about these elements as something that at some point we are going to take care of, that mindset is going to be the real challenge to the metaverse. And as you approach every customer's conversation, and if you talk to them about the metaverse and the future of these virtual worlds, I want you to have in your mind the music from the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Any of you remember the music? Is a very, it kind of became the DNA of the movie itself. And I want you to have that in mind because in the 60s, maybe today, but in the 60s for sure, when you had a movie to shoot, you would do the whole movie. You would think about the characters and the scenes and everything, and then you would think about the music. Last little detail, something that you would build on top of the movie. People like it, great. If people didn't like the music, you would leave without a great music. It was the same. But Sergio Leone, in this case, said, I want this music to become the DNA of the movie itself. And so he didn't even finish the script, and he went to Ennio Morricone. And he asked Ennio Morricone to write the music for the movie. He wanted music to inspire the scenes. He wanted music to inspire the actors, and he ultimately wanted music that people would always remember, even more than the movie. And that happened. Today, the music is probably one of the most iconic things of the movie. This is exactly how we need to think about privacy and trust and security as we approach the metaverse. If we leave it as something that we will take care of once everything is ready, we'll not achieve what we want to achieve. But if we start to think, hey, keep that detail and let's build around it, have that detail becoming a very distinctive part of the experiences that we offer, then consumers, customers, they will remember that. And so have the music in mind as you approach these conversations today. Thank you.
That was fascinating. How do you think about the next 10 years, right? And you talked about the 1, 2, 3, 5-year progression. Just lay out specifically from a security standpoint, in the next 2 years, what are the most pressing issues that companies should be thinking about?
I think when it comes to privacy and identity, as I said, is really strengthening the processes. And really thinking about the technology that are going to help them. I don't think that in the next 2 years, we are going to experience things that are completely different from a risk perspective that we have experienced since now. But I think what happens is that you put the risk on steroids. Those issues around the fact that you now interact with someone that has the voice of someone that you know potentially, has the look and feel of someone that you know, clearly can trick people into providing credentials, providing details around financials. So everything that has to do with that is beyond even the identity thefts. It's really around fraudulent activities that happen. And the problem that we are going to have is that still we struggle to associate legal personality and liability to the real people today. Yep. So you can have a lot of criminals that are going to impersonate others, trick you in providing information, access, everything, and then it's going to be very, very difficult to actually track them down in real life and say, you need to pay for what you did. So that gray area is something that companies have to embrace from day one, meaning I cannot expect for the problem to happen and then for someone to pay for it. I need to make everything that I can upfront, making sure that I know who those individuals are, who those identities are.
Yeah, it's interesting. OneSpan's brand isn't that well known, but when I was coming here, one of the first things I thought about it was one identity spanning all realms.
Yeah.
Physical, the web, the metaverse. So I totally agree with you. That's got to be core. So if people in this audience wanted to actually go to the metaverse, how do you get there? Do you just put on goggles or put on wearables, or is there a dress you type?
I think you can just start to explore. Probably Roblox is one of those spaces where there is a lot going on. You can go and visit the virtual spaces, the digital properties of one of your brands that you like. Again, the luxury fashion brands have a lot of presence there. A lot of consumer brands have presence there. But maybe you want to go and see how one of those banks is actually operating. And you click through a link and you are in that space, and you can decide to leave it with your phone, very much still as a two-dimensional in a sense, but you can also then decide to go for a headset, and then it will become more of a 3D experience. But we are not going to jump in any virtual space.
I never thought there was a big difference between the dark web and the metaverse. Like, how should we? There's a lot of goodness that can happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad. Is there any difference, really? I mean, it's just, when you think about it.
I think that today, at least when we think about the dark web, we have points of reference. We know what some of those things are. We have learned to recognize some of that. For the metaverse, it's still very much unknown. And this is what is so scary to me, is that, and when I think about risk assessments that are on steroids, we need to run them. Because honestly, we don't have a lot of examples yet of how dark that can become. We have the fiction science books that are going to tell us that it's going to be terrible and all the risks that we can perceive there. But I think in real life there is a lot that we have to learn, and I really wouldn't like to learn that the hard way, because I think some of those issues might have very significant consequences for real people in real life, for mental health, and we cannot wait to be there to say, oh yes, there is a problem to solve.
So we had Jason Whitty, who I consider one of the best chief security officers out there, here yesterday, talking about some of the threats that he's facing in the physical/digital world. I mean, why are these banks moving so quickly without having solved the identity problem? They can't even solve it in the physical world. I mean, how do you rationalize that? There
is a problem that we all know. There is the working in silos problem. So you have the units that are investing and see the potential, a lot of, again, from marketing to customer-facing role, to really to even the business projects that I see, those are people that see the opportunity there. Clearly because they work in silo, and because typically when you talk about security or privacy, it's not that they are going to invite you to the table. It's for us to go there, knock the door, and say, hey, look, there is another aspect to this. And it's so important and can kill the project altogether, can bring the brand in such a terrible reputational damage and issues that it will be difficult to recover. So I think there is a need to really break silos there and to have that conversation between business, the marketing team, really and the risk side, the security people be there in the room. The real threat for me is that, security people have this reputation to say, no, we cannot do that. And my worry is that in this conversation, security people that aren't necessarily spending time, privacy people that are spending the time really to think about the risk, they maybe don't have the tool today to provide responses. They might go into this conversation and say, hey, block everything, we are not doing that. And that is going to be a big problem. So this is why the education on the security side, on the legal side, on the privacy side, is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, the conversation is going to end very quickly. And this is something that we cannot afford. I mean, we are talking about very important societal risks here. We have to be prepared for that.
Well, we've seen it with the Apple phones and people reacting to kids. Facebook depression is a term now. I mean, do you think it's any worse in the metaverse than it is right now on the internet?
Oh, it will be much worse, because the interaction will feel so much more real. And also, we have to start to think about issue of potential dependencies with these technologies, where you might be almost feeling that we think about the metaverse as an extension of the real world, right? But what about some of these kids really deciding to spend more time in this extension of the world rather than the real life? And their set of values, their set of risks, understanding is not tailored for that today. And so there is really an important challenge there. I think that everything that has to do with mental health can really become much more aggravated in the metaverse.
Which is scary, because it's getting pretty bad right now just with the internet itself. And security has always lagged technology, right? And government has always lagged technology. Do you really think that people are going to get ahead of the curve in a different way with the metaverse than they have with the internet? I mean, we talk about going from Web 2.0 to 3.0, and I use the term a lot, Web 2.5, which is the implication stage of moving from a truly social environment to one that's decentralized and meta. We haven't solved that yet. Do you think the government is capable of making it safe before the metaverse becomes something big, or do you think it's going to be, chasing it after the fact?
As a, again, policy person, I would love to say that governments understand this and they will do the right thing, which if they start today, maybe in 10 years, we are going to have something to work on. What I think is going to be necessary is that harmonization piece between physical and digital. The rules will have to make sense. The two sets of rules will have to make sense together, will have to be harmonized for this to work. Otherwise, imagine that you are walking down the street with your headset, and now you have a different set of rules around your interaction physically with people. You know that you cannot just go on and punch someone in the face. And then you have a completely different set of rules for your digital world where some behaviors are allowed. I think that is going to be very difficult. That is going to potentially create very, very systematic issues. So I think governments will have any way to come and to embrace the role of this harmonization piece. But what is different for me today is that at some point, if we really keep going into this evolution, if we want the metaverse, the piece around digital identity is fundamental. You cannot have the metaverse if we don't solve the digital identity piece. And again, this is technology, this is governance, and this is legal systems. Without solving that, there is no metaverse. And so this is why I think that at some point, this is a conversation that we will have to have if we want the metaverse. It's not like privacy, who cares? You can still go on Facebook, you can do all these things and leave privacy aside. The metaverse doesn't give you that choice if you really want to have the whole thing. So
that's why I'm so excited about OneSpan and came here, right? Because it all starts with the individual,
yep.
right? And that's, our proud history of 30 years dealing with the end user is something that security companies typically haven't done. How do you think through this? I mean, it's mind-boggling, really. Even if you look at the, go to a slight tangent here, but the moon, right? You have people going to the moon, landing on the moon, want to build things on the moon. There's no real regulations. No one owns the moon.
Yep.
No one owns the metaverse. I mean, do you think that these other realms, whether it's going to a different planet or going to the metaverse, which might be the equivalent of it, do you think the global, community, which is at such odds now, pick any geopolitical situation, do you think it can be solved, actually can be solved?
It's a very difficult question. I think, again, from a design perspective, we cannot go jurisdiction by jurisdiction. We will have to have a set of governance, a set of rules that at least at the highest level are shared globally. Because again, it's not that in Europe you are going to have a set of rules and then, again, at the higher level, if we want to have this whole experience with the metaverse. There is a danger there, though, which is you say no one owns the metaverse. And so that gives us at least a possibility to sit down and say, okay, which is the set of rules that might emerge that we are going to use for it. My issue, my worry is that actually there will be just a few companies that are just, that have an advantage. In fact, today, put more money into it, started to build this kind of environments. They are going to set up de facto standards. And then if you talk to one of your customers and you're a bank and you are starting to invest in these environments, first of all, you can then be locked in one of these environments. And you are don't have an opportunity to say, I need a different governance. I want to refer to a higher standard because it's going to be difficult once you are locked in. This is an impact that many don't understand today. There is also the possibility that, if there are these big companies deciding how things are going to play out, they are going to create governance, and I see that in privacy all the time. You remember in 2014, Google was asked by a European regulator in Spain to delete data of a specific end user. There were no processes. The regulator didn't say how to do it. And so you had Google that had to comply with a decision from an authority, but they had the opportunity to choose which process to use, which safeguards they wanted to put in place, which limitation they wanted to put in place. This is a dangerous thing to do when you do it with one company. So I think that for those that are investing in building these spaces, it's important to create the opportunity to start sharing standards for a company like you participating early in those conversations and say, well, there are specific aspects that we need to take care of. Because otherwise we will end up in a place where there are a few companies that will simply decide how things is going to work. And again, that is not just a bad thing, that also can fundamentally bring us far away from the metaverse opportunity as it could be.
Yeah, security has never ever been baked in from the beginning in anything from at least the 25 years that I've been into it. And you bring up a good point about the process. The right to be forgotten was incredibly hard to, when someone passes away, how do you get rid of their personal information? How do you think about crossing borders, right? We're a very global company. Yep. Every time I get on a plane and go to a country or visit a customer, the ID systems change. In the metaverse, there's no borders. Is there a country that's ahead? Or, do you really think that there's going to be boundaries in the metaverse that countries can control?
International data transfer by itself is already a very difficult matter, but I think this is one of the things that we have to kind of have consistent perspective. What I say, I come from Europe, And anything that has to do with identity, with verification, with trusted identities, almost every country in Europe is going to have a set of rules that they want to use. I always love the fact that if you talk to a German customer, they are going to say, oh, we need qualified signature all the time. Then you go in France and they say, well, we can do it advanced. And you ask them, why? I mean, why is that from the same use cases? You might have these very different approaches. Has to do sometimes with their own risk appetite, with how they understand in that country, in that region, things being done. And I think this is a reality that is not going to go away. For some use cases, for certain things, this will prevail. Probably you have read the European Union, the update, the ADAS regulation and their plan for digital wallets, 80% of the European citizens by 2013 using digital identities to engage with services. And they are saying everybody by 2030 will have a digital record, medical record that they can access. So I can say Europe is definitely pushing a lot of these, more from a regulatory standard governance perspective. They have a lot of issues from then making it happen, and we can talk about the endless discussions about the definition of the standards that they are having and actually how this in practice is going to work out. And then you have other regions that don't have the same push from a regulatory perspective, but I can see already, even here in the US, how some banks are really thinking about know your business partner, exactly as they did for know your customer regulation. There are guidelines now that are asking other verticals to think about AML verification, not just financial services. So in some region, you have governments really pushing these, and there is a lot of fragmentation. There are other regions where there is less of a government push, but then in the day-to-day activities, they understand the need to just strengthen some of these processes. So I think we're going to meet somewhere in the middle from governments and from the industry pushing. Will be a perfect interoperable system? Probably not. But we will meet somewhere in the middle, I think.
What do you think about the security threats? One of the things that drove me nuts was when Facebook started manipulating. I mean, it was really bad, right? They started publishing, if they sensed that you were depressed on the internet, they would publish negative content and marketing with it, and it was just really true manipulation. And you spoke to that a little bit up there. But what other types of security threats outside of maybe manipulating end users for marketing do you see out there coming from this ability to get deep information on people?
So there is one element that I want to mention that I think has changed over time with we see in the data that we have of security teams. First of all, companies already today are not thinking about the external threat, the internal threat as fundamentally different. There is an understanding that's a threat to me. It doesn't matter if it's internal or external, the way I approach it might be different, but this is a reality. And also, there is a lot of understanding of risk from third parties. These, as a conceptual elements, will stay in place. These are still the bad actors you have to try to target. This is still the threats that is coming through. And of course, in our conversation, we did say, we are talking about that end user entering to your organization from that very external perspective. And so they need really to have trust around who these people are, employees, these end users, whoever they are, partners coming into your organization from that third party's perspective. So I think as a categories, we are still going to look for those. I think that when it comes to the identity, we said, manipulation one, but there is real risk of identity fraud. And I can tell you, European consumers, when they have to rate the risks, identity fraud is typically the number one that they are going to be worried about. When we ask companies which kind of data was compromised out of attacks and breaches, they are still going to say personal data and those authentication credentials. So strengthening those elements, I think, will be still important. So what I'm saying fundamentally is that this is the time where we need to think about data types that we will need to protect, that we need to think about vectors of attacks that we need to focus on, and these will stay as they are. Then there is a lot of phishing. There will be more phishing happening, of course, on the internet. There will be all kinds of identity thefts in various ways that we maybe don't know today. Those will keep happening, but if we can we can identify those third parties elements, internal, external threats, and then the type of data that we need to protect. I think that may be a framework that we can use as we prepare for tomorrow's risks.
Do you think every nation state has different types of ways they approach security? I was at a dinner with Andy McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, and the head of Facebook, head of policy for Facebook, before Andy McCabe got fired by Trump. It was like literally the day before. But what they said was that they said U.S. is a fundamental disadvantage versus other countries because we're a nation of laws. And we don't think as creatively as others who have different legal systems and legal frameworks, right? Do you think any nation has an advantage in the metaverse over another nation?
Well, certainly, we are at the starting point still, so everybody can have an advantage there. What I think is very true, though, and I've heard that after so many security conferences, is that if you want to be ahead of the threats, you need that level of creativity in a way. You need to work as they work, think as they think. And I think that is still true, is the ability to really prevent, think ahead of what is going to happen. It's also true but as a society, we need a set of ethics and value and governance. And I think that I struggle to see that as a disadvantage. I think that there are ways that we can work within those constructs of governance and rules to make sure to do the right things. Sometimes implications are not just on the kind of security. There are security, but there is also implication on, again, the ethics, governance. We need to carry them with us. It's not. I don't think that you can only say, well, technology for technology, attack for attack, and that's the end of the story. I don't think that's necessarily the way it is or it should be.
Do you think the metaverse is really the biggest threat is to the end user? In the internet, obviously, you can hack into nuclear power plants. You can hack into SCADA systems, infrastructure. You can shut things down, right? It is an access point. It sounds almost as if you're saying the metaverse is the access point to your brain, as opposed to like shutting something down, right? You're literally exposing yourself. You are the attack surface as an individual in the metaverse, where on the internet, you literally can break into a system, a physical system.
That's so well said, exactly. And because it's in our brain, and because we are employees, we are users, we are customers, then each of us potentially can become the threat vector. So because exactly it can be in our brain, and if someone says it's me, but it's not me, comes already with a level of trust and access to my company system, wherever I go, to my customer system for what I'm supposed to. Yeah. And so, yes, it's really enlarging, expanding that threat surface potentially in a very dramatic way. So I think that's pretty well said.
So we've been talking about helping customers move to this new world of 3.0, and here we are talking about really 4.0, and in some cases just the symbiotic web is something people talk about, being able to have brain-to-machine type of conversations. To keep it real, when we go out there with our customers, many of them which you showed up there, how do you have a real conversation around this in a consultative way without getting too far over your skis where you sound like you're fear-mongering or you're talking, what is the most tangible, real use cases or concerns that would be legitimate to talk about today as this thing develops?
Well, I've repeated that a few times, but because it's something that I touch with my hands every day, which is the risk assessment piece. Even when I work with for some of my customers, might be in Europe, might be here, and we think about how do you think about that authentication verification piece within processes that you have to solve for the risk. How do you assess the risk? How do you know the degree of verification, the steps that you want to take? How do you know the governance layer that you need to wrap around this technology to make sure that you are comfortable? And of course, risk is security, but risk is legal requirements. These might be industry-specific requirements that they have. It might be something specific to their company. It might be a specific element. If you're a bank, if you're healthcare, there may be risk specific to who you are as an organization that you need to then cater for. And so I think for me, whenever you say, there is an appetite for a business project in the metaverse, one of the points is like, have you risk assessed? Do you even have a way to assess the risks that relate to identity, that relate to privacy, as you are preparing for that? And you will very quickly understand they don't even know which requirements to look at to start the risk assessment. Yep. And I think that once you get there, once you are teaching them, here are some of the requirements you can think about. This is some of the risk we know, security, identity, and then this is the layer that we are going to add there. I think this is really where you are going to help them change the mindset, which is a risk-based mindset. But I always love some of my colleagues that do risk. They say, you do risk management to allow your business to go to the next thing, to allow your business to take the next risk. So it becomes, we solve these risks, so now that you can move on to the next big thing. And I think that is the mindset that we need to have. For security, know your risk. Identity, know your risk. Try to break those silos. And then really help them to see that this is not just to say, no, we cannot do it. This is enabling their organization to say, we are safe here, or we are sufficiently comfortable here. Let's move to the next piece and see how we can make that happen. I think that is what it is. And to me, while you can sell them a technology, while can you help them orchestrate a process, the specific risk assessment piece is something that organizations struggle a lot with, and I think that would be a good starting point.
Yeah, we had a slide yesterday of crossing the chasm of 2.0 to 3.0, and enterprises are going to go there, with or without security. How do you? There's talk that Microsoft's going to revamp their approach to identity, right, by fusing biometrics. We had, I don't know if people know this, but we had two candidates, one that actually got hired, but we caught two candidates at OneSpan, and we're a small company, right, that hired people to take a job interview, but they weren't the actual candidate. So one we caught before we hired them, the other one we caught after. But in a virtual world, this is just a remote world. It's not even virtual, right? If it's happening at OneSpan, I don't know how many times it's happening at General Electric or some big company. Do you feel, and that's a real threat. It's a threat to a business, but it gets very personal when you start fusing biometrics with a digital identity. It's a different layer.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? I mean, is it needed? Would you allow it? I mean, you sound like you're sufficiently skeptical, which is a good thing.
So first of all, as I think about that now, as you're asking me, there is again that system of legal requirements that differ. So first of all, it depends where you are. Europe tends to have very specific rules around biometrics, but also US states are passing a lot of legislation about biometric, how you can use it, the use cases. So first, again, risk assessment, the first layer will be understand from a legal perspective what you can do, what you cannot do, and also which are the safeguards you put in place. And then I think there are some very specific high risk, high impact use cases where I can see how you could justify something like that. Now, it's interesting that you are talking about the recruiting process. In the US, there is new privacy legislation kicking in very soon, formally already kicked in, but we have time until the summer. And so it's complex from that kind of requirements perspective, make sure that you do the right things as an organization. But I also know that there may be indeed some very high risk, high impact situations where I can see these working. It's the responsibility of a company, of course, collecting that kind of very sensitive information, make sure that they use it for that specific purpose, make sure that they understand who is accessing that, making sure they understand, again, the safeguards around it. And I think there is necessarily not you cannot do that. There is, let's find a way to do that to serve the purpose without creating risks that we don't need to create.
Any guidance for OneSpan and the sales team here as they go out and engage with their customers and to credibly be able to address this future without getting too ahead?
Have the music in your head, as I said. I think, first of all, know your facts, meaning if you want to have the conversation about the metaverse, you might end up with customers that are like, oh, yes, we are going to do all these amazing things. And on the other side, you have a customer that are going to say, no, I'm not interested. I need to think about what to do today. So you need to be prepared and have facts to actually give a good, realistic standpoint to those that are already off to the tangent there and say, well, this is a business aspect. There is, all those risks that if you don't take care of, this can be very much a barrier to what you are trying to achieve, and educating them on the risks. And then there are those that say, oh, this will never happen. And then the question is, why do I have to care? And you have to care because there is a competitive issue. Your company will need to go there at some point because everybody else is like, would you imagine a brand today without a website? Would you imagine a brand today without an app?
No.
It's impossible. It will be exactly the same. If your competitors will go into the metaverse, whatever industry you are, you will have to go. There is not a choice there. And so this will happen. It's just a matter of preparing for it. And I think the more you can learn around realistically what this opportunity is, what the risks are, I think those are always good conversation to have. And look, maybe they are not going to necessarily invest a ton of money on day one, but they will start to recognize that kind of knowledge, thought leadership, consultative approach that they want. When the day comes, they will say, oh, I had that conversation. I think they are the one that can help me. And I think you are at the right time in a very, very topical space. The digital identity space is really opening up to a number of use cases and opportunities that we didn't have in the past.
I agree.
So it's just a very, very crucial time to be in this business.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, so as we go into companies and talk to them about not just this issue, but identity, you look at the identity space and it feels very old to me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how mature do you think the actual solutions are in identity to address this issue? If you're going in, if a seller is going in there and going into an enterprise, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think the maturity is of the identity security technologies to handle this?
There is a lot of work that we have to do. I will respond to that. This is why I said strengthening your processes today, understand the technology that you need today, because still that's an area where there is a lot of work to be done. It's interesting. I started in this industry 10 years ago, and the identity and access management issues were there. Slightly different shape or forms are still there today. It's a very crucial aspect. And now we are talking here about a set of use cases that are completely different from what we have seen in the past. And I am really, really excited if you think about that self-sovereign and decentralized identities. I have clients that are saying, I am ready for that.
Do you think it will happen, self-sovereign identities?
In the decentralized identity version of it, I think it can happen. I've seen some clients in Europe, banks, that actually have the use cases.
That's true.
They have the use cases for it, and they are struggling to orchestrate in a way that the technology and the processes actually help them. Now, you have the European Union that is trying to talk about the trusted attributes and how you do those trusted attributes. You know, regulators also have a responsibility. If these things happen, and we want it to happen with governance in the right way, we also need to allow the business to do things in a way that makes sense. If we start to create this high barrier for the user, that may be complicated, but there is no question from a business perspective, the use cases are already there.
This has been fascinating and scary, but it's a huge opportunity, right? But it's certainly topical, and I think we'd love to have you back at some time in the future as your research continues to unfold. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Anytime. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.